Hello, my name is Mike Davis-Marks and I'm the managing editor of the Veteran.uk and a director of Veteran Force. Welcome to an exciting new podcast series called The Veteran Voice, featuring veterans talking about their military experiences and what they did after their service, and in particular, how their transferable skills transferred from what they learnt during the military into their new civilian roles. It promises to be an exciting listen. Roll on. So the first interview of the Veteran Voice is going to be with Alan Spence, co-founder of the Veteran.uk and Veteran Force, who started his early years in Fleet Street in notables like the Financial Times and Reuters, set up his own media company, and then is still in the multimedia business now. Alan, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourselves on top of what I've just said.
Well, I mean, I was born in Hull a few years after the end of the Second World War, which was still very much a hard-hit town from the Blitz. I grew up with the armed forces very prominent in my life, in the sense that Hull is a place where a lot of armed forces personnel come from, and still do, where there are a lot of military veterans. My father would tell me the stories of the war, and I could see the damage that the war had caused around in Hull, which was incidentally the second most bombed city after London in the United Kingdom. So there were all these factors, really, and my parents talking about people who were no longer around because of the war and so on, that I developed this great interest in armed forces, the sort of terrible situations that can develop when things go badly wrong. And I guess that stayed with me, and it continued to evolve. Through my teenage years, I thought of perhaps going into the armed forces, but my first love has always been journalism and publishing. And although I did go to one or two interviews, I was able to get to Fleet Street, very privileged to get to Fleet Street at the age of 21 to work for Reuters. And that I did, and it was a great experience. Subsequently moved on to Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, very much a career of financial, commercial type journalism.
And then sometime down the road, after you'd started this distinguished journalistic career, you decided to set up your own media business yourself. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, that was quite young, really. I mean, and sometimes I look back and I think, well, really should I have hung around in Fleet Street a bit longer? But I was only in my mid-20s when I decided to go freelance and specialise in various rather esoteric financial subjects, which editors in various newspapers, magazines found interesting, and then that steadily morphed from me being a writer, a hack, to thinking up ideas for actual publishing companies themselves. And I, in my early 30s, in particular, I felt that there was a need for a different type of what we call customer publishing model to be developed at that time. And custom publishing, for people who don't know about that, is basically a publisher that produces publications, often finances them through sponsorship and advertising for a client, which could be a government, could be a big aircraft company, could be, as it turned into, supplying directly all sorts of communications, materials, publications to the armed forces. And a bit later in my 30s, that was that was what I did. I founded such a company, and it obviously occupied a niche where there was demand for the way that we did it, which was combining. I don't want to speak too loudly of my honour, etc. But it combined high quality editorial with good advertising opportunities and sponsorship, and that combination worked.
And that led to that business was Newsdesk Media Limited. I think it'd be fair to say that you were ahead of your time when you were setting that up. But those links to your childhood that your second love of the military, that they came into bearing when you set up Newsdesk Media, didn't they?
They did indeed, yes, because it was then, because it was my company. I was able to produce publications for any organisation which liked the idea and felt it would be useful. But at the same time, I could proactively indulge my great interest in the armed forces and security issues and international situations and so on. And so, yes, eventually I was publishing the yearbooks for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, NATO, and it was a great time because of that and because of the closeness to the armed forces. I was asked to become trustee of this and trustee of that. I set up an office in Washington, D.C., which then had its links to things like the Atlantic Council, which is one of the top DC think tanks with strong connections to NATO, and worked with them. So it took me down avenues, or put it another way around, I was able to take myself down avenues which fitted very well with my personal interests, and also a sort of building through the years of actually doing something for military veterans. And I got involved, as I say, with doing what I could here and there with sponsorships, as you know, as one would expect, given the involvement with the armed forces. And anything that I did that was helpful, I'm very proud of that.
Excellent. Well, I have personal recollection of the Navy's yearbook, which is called Broadsheet, over a number of years, and thinking what a high quality product this was. So it was always well received by certainly the senior service, and I'm sure the other two services as well. Let's go back into these military links that you were pursuing whilst you were running Newsdesk. You said you were in Atlantic Alliance. You were director there, weren't you, twice?
I was, yes, I did 2 4-year terms as a director of the Atlantic Council in Washington, and that was a fascinating experience. I was close to the president, who indeed is still the president, Fred Kemp, who's made a remarkable success of the Atlantic Council. He's a former journalist himself. He was editor of the Wall Street Journal, the European Wall Street Journal, and a great scholar of international relations. That was a fascinating time, and I was able to meet all sorts of people. And sometimes I pinched myself looking at the pictures and thinking, was I really there? And apparently I was.
And apparently you were. And interesting, I think you mentioned at some stage that you sponsored the inaugural dinner for the RAF Battle of Britain dinners in Washington. And isn't there a bust of Winston Churchill that has something to do with you in the Pentagon?
The thing about all that was that I was a trustee of the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon and Cosford, obviously in the United Kingdom. Some years before, there had been an organisation created in DC called the RAF Museum American Foundation. Well, the objective of that was to raise funding and support for the UK-based museums. But it also took it on further than that, in that it was also a means by which the Air Force says, and of course there's more than one Air Force in the United States, the US Army Air Force and the Navy Air Force and so on. So all the Air Forces and the Royal Air Force it was a platform on which they could meet. Money was running out for an annual event that took place, organised by our Ministry of Defence. And we stood in for them. We organised the gala dinner, the so-called Battle of Britain dinner, which was the genesis, really, of the Battle of Britain dinners, which still take place to this day. And it's a kind of must-have ticket if you're in that area of defence relations, security, armed forces, and so on, particularly air forces. And it's still a wonderful event, and doing very well. And I'm privileged to still be director emeritus of it. Once again, I met some wonderful people, and people giving of their all in a charitable way to promote relations between the US and the UK. It was our little bit, if you like, of the special relationship, and we didn't do badly, and it continues to do immensely well in these troubled times, bringing people together. The Churchill bust is an interesting story. Some of the listeners will probably be aware of all the issues which have surrounded Churchill busts in the plural in Washington, because some presidents wanted them in the Oval Office, others declined, and so there was never a bust which had been created and given to the Pentagon. And people who have been to the Pentagon and walked down, say, the D-Day corridor, that the walls of the Pentagon in places resonate the value of the special relationship and the great historical collaboration of the UK with the US in, amongst other things, 2 world wars. That's before you get into the Cold War and other things that we've done together. But there was no bust of Churchill in the Pentagon. And so as a kind of a way around the presidential bust issues, the in and into the cupboard and back out of the cupboard, or whatever was happening to Churchill's bust in the White House, I was asked if I could champion a campaign to get a bust into the D-Day corridor of the Pentagon, and one way or another we succeeded in doing that. We had this created. It was presented to the Chief of the Defence Staff in the United Kingdom at Russia one night, and it was then taken over. It weighs a hell of a lot, and it was flown in by the RAF into Dulles, and then hidden away in the embassy until it was deemed politically the right time for it to be erected in the Pentagon. And so that was another little thing that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, lovely. It's a lovely story. So we move forward, and at some stage you sold Newsdesk Media to a hedge fund. that gave you an opportunity to re-enter the market because nothing else was being done. So tell us about the early thoughts that led to the Veteran.uk.
When I sold Newsdesk, there were a number of things on my mind. I'd worked very hard for nearly 20 years, and there was a list in my head, and sometimes, on the back of an envelope of things that I wanted to do. And I ticked them off one at a time. I returned to my home city to assist with Hull City of Culture in 2017, for instance, and I organised a big global event on modern day slavery, driving off obviously the relationship between William Wilberforce, who was the man who got slavery abolished eventually, and he was an MP and citizen of Hull, and so that was one thing, and there were others as well. And then after a few years, I thought, well, publishing is still in me. My love for the military remains intact. I'll just have a look around and see what's happening. And I started with veterans, and it became pretty obvious that veterans were still getting the, shall we say, not very good deal when they transitioned. Obviously not all of them. I mean, some of them came out and prospered instantly, and some did very well, but there were many who were not getting a good deal. And nothing had changed from the days when I tried to be helpful with involvements in all sorts of things, running my business. So I thought what was needed was the creation of a campaign, really. The name came up, the Veteran.uk. It's a multimedia campaign designed to put front and central the case for veterans right across the UK employment market. Veterans, as we know, they possess great soft skills like leadership and project management and discipline, and they even turn up.
And a sense of humour.
And they've got a sense of humour. And, these are all valuable qualities, but, they're not necessarily appreciated by employers in the civilian sector. They also have, on top of that, great hard skills, the things that they focused on in whichever service they were in. So, I mean, obvious ones like, cyber, other ones like logistics, and so it went on. I mean, of course, if you get into engineering, that's another great asset, the skills that some people develop in the engineering sector, and of course they've probably done time at universities and specialist colleges during their service if they've been in for a while. So, it's a great mix. And I couldn't help but feel that a lot of people were being underemployed in roles which did not in any way reflect their abilities, and that it was a job, it wasn't a career, and that not only were they losing out, but their employers were losing out, and the country was losing out. And of course we do have now, and we won't go into the reasons, but we're very much aware of them, a great skills shortage. And we're better to turn in a great skills shortage than to military veterans who have got this wonderful combination of soft and hard skills to deploy. Now, in addition to that, it was also setting out with that first and foremost, but backing up is the idea of championing veterans not only to employers but also to themselves, because it's not easy in many cases to actually engage your skills directly with what your potential employer wants, because they may be named differently. There might be a complete gap in terms of appreciation on the employer's side of the soft skills. So, it was set up to remind veterans, and we do this in various ways, of their value in the employment market, and remind employers of the same thing, that they should be taking up these opportunities as well. So that was how it was started. We've got lots of support. It's a kind of a niche player as an independent campaign on behalf of veterans. It's multimedia, and as you can hear, everybody, we're just moving into podcasts.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, that multimedia campaign comprises, printed publications, digital versions of that. You've got the online website that's evolving as we speak. The podcast, this is the first of what would be a series of podcasts. It's YouTube. There's now a social media campaign as well. So you're doing a lot for veterans, actually, and it's really good to see. Tell me where you see the future.
Well, I mean, in terms of the veteran.uk, we will continue to beat the drum for veterans into employment, and we'll be doing that by expanding and diversifying the ways in which we promote them, both in terms of print, in terms of events, in terms of digital delivery, in terms of all sorts of additional ways that we believe we can get the message over. Yeah. We do see ourselves moving into, just to be absolutely clear, we're not a jobs agency. We are a campaign to champion and promote, and under that banner, we can do all sorts of things in terms of events, seminars, and get-togethers, and we're developing some ideas at the moment, which they're still up our sleeve, but we see ourselves becoming a more profound campaigner on behalf of veterans, using veterans increasingly as part and parcel of the process.
Okay, that's really interesting. And of course, more recently, and what you might say the other side of the coin, which is not veterans in deployment, but how veterans can volunteer to help communities, has come Veteran Force. So tell us a little bit about that.
Veteran Force is indeed the other side of the same coin. We're talking on the one side, the veteran.uk, about working age veterans, so could be as young as 17, could be as old as people work. So it's a big area, and that's all about employment and maxing out on the skills that I've just talked about. In terms of Veteran Force, it's an idea that we came up with in order to assist this country regain some of the societal resilience which it needs to have for social, financial, and humanitarian purposes, to strengthen our basic daily resilience. the way in which people are helped and assisted, the way in which help uh, and care can be got to them. Now then, it's a totally apolitical, uh, totally and absolutely apolitical organisation. And what it involves is small groups of veterans acting as the backbone of volunteer groups. And these volunteer groups are championed by us in the Veteran Force multimedia campaign, similar uh, in processes and so on as the TV UK multimedia campaign. But these stories we get out there to encourage others to do the same, to replicate what these good people are doing. So we have found a number of what we would describe as grassroots, community-based, veteran-run volunteer groups, which are doing all sorts of things, such as helping kids who've got nowhere to go in the evenings because there's no youth clubs in the area. Yeah, so teaching them first aid. I mean, some of these kids that a group, for instance, who are our first exemplar of a community veteran force down in Littlehampton called Veteran Volunteer Services, set up by a guy from One Para, Gary Hart, and his wife, who's a trained instructor. These kids that they bring in, I mean, without their help and assistance, I mean, they could be in other circumstances, shall we say, difficult to handle. And they're teaching them citizenship. They're teaching them all sorts of practical skills, and they bring them in to play sport. And there's a lot going on around there. Also, I mean, Veteran Volunteer Service in Littlehampton, they provide guiders for blind people, including to blind veterans. They encourage people to, report to them anybody who's finding life particularly challenging. On top of that, you've got other things that they will do, including collect food from supermarkets and take them to points of need. All these little things, well, big things in some cases, but everything matters far more than many people would think within those services.
Sure. Okay, so there's so many questions I could ask about this, but unfortunately time marches on, and this is the last question. What message have you got to tell listeners about whether they want to start up a voluntary veteran-led initiative, or indeed, contacting us if they're already doing something so that we can champion them?
Well, as I say, we are discovering what people are doing already, and we're championing them. The next thing is that we ourselves are directly involved in putting together veteran forces in 3 different locations in the United Kingdom, bringing people together at grassroots level to do precisely what we're talking about. What is needed is for veterans themselves or an organization in a community to seek out some veterans who would be willing to participate in or even lead a group that would bring their skills to bear in these situations at grassroots level. The best way to find out about how To do this, they can contact us directly, and the details are on the veteran.uk website on how to do that. We are shortly producing a manual for people to apply to get their hands on at no charge, no cost, and that will have full explanations in as to how to proceed. And as I say, I want to really stress that, you know, we do have support in government for this. It's nothing to do with government, but they do see the point of it all, because societal resilience in Britain is at a very low level. We are facing very challenging times, and that's not just nationally but internationally. And as the international challenge develops, we do not here want to be in a position where people, for all sorts, many sorts of reasons, social, financial, economic, whatever, are falling through the grid. That's not how a strong society has to be when confronting big challenges.
I mean, there's so much more we can talk about this, but for now, thank you very much for your erudite comments. If people want to find out more about Veteran Force and the veteran.uk, details will be along with this podcast when they're published. But for the time being, Alan Spence, journalist, media boss, founder of the veteran.uk and co-founder of Veteran Force, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Been a delight.